All right, so I just got done making a video for the really large poem in this section by Wordsworth called Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey. I may have messed that title up, but while making it, I decided that I thought I would do something different for my college prep class and give you guys two of the smaller poems that I think might be more meaningful for you. That other poem's very difficult, not that you guys can't handle it, but I think that a lot of you would be frustrated by it. So I picked two other ones. These are both very famous poems by Wordsworth. These are almost always taught when you talk about Wordsworth. The other one is, at times, because of its length and its complexity, at times it's left out. So if you're interested and if you like Wordsworth, I can always shoot you that video as well if you would just be interested in learning more about it. But let's start with a poem called The World is Too Much With Us. And as I put in my little intro to this, I feel like this might be, his most famous poem, at least because it's the one that's taught the most, I believe. Very short. You're going to have the text down below these videos. I'm going to probably shoot this one and then do London 1802, which is the other poem. I'll probably do it separate, just so that you can study the ones you need when it comes time to prep for the test. So, all right, so let's start with The World is Too Much With Us. By the way, typical, I believe this is a sonnet, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines. Always your first clue to look for. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a sonnet, but usually 14 lines equals a sonnet. It's also got the boxy shape that goes with it. So, a lot of the stuff we've talked about sonnets in the past is now in play for this, okay? All right, let's get started. The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature, that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn, so might I, standing on this pleasant lay, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. All right. Great poem, by the way. I love this one. Wordsworth is a difficult poet for me. I'm not much of a nature guy. I mean, I love nature, but as far as nature in my poems, I'm not a big fan of that. I'm much more, I liked like William Blake when we studied him. I liked the more socially aware poetry, although that's why these two poems are actually two that I like, all right? So The World is Too Much With Us. Just the title. By the way, it's awkwardly worded, but basically he's saying there's too much of the world in us, all right? Now, again, Wordsworth's writing these in late 1700s, early 1800s, and pointing out some definite problems in our world that have not stopped in the 2 centuries and change since these were written, okay? I mean, we've gotten worse, to be honest with you. Okay, so he starts off with these first few lines are great. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Think about that. So much of who we are and so much of what we were put on this earth to be, we waste in trying to gather goods, to gather items. You can look right now at our economy as a week to 2 weeks maybe of really difficult times. It's almost buried many industries. And it's sending people running for the hills because so much of our life is wrapped up in possessions. Now, granted, you got to pay the power bill and you got to pay the water bill, but we are so built up on being able to buy stuff that as soon as that's threatened, we go into panic mode. All right. So Wordsworth is nailing this right here. He says, hey, there's too much of the world in us. Now, remember, romantics like to argue about the urban versus nature. And so the world representing the urban, and he's saying there's not enough nature in us. I mean, the third line, little we see in nature, that is ours. He says, you look around at nature now, and that's not what we're about anymore. We're about city life. We're about stuff. We're about owning things. We're not about the trees and the peacefulness that comes with nature. We're too fast. We move around all the time. And again, think about that versus compared to today. I mean, what he wrote back then compared to today. If Wordsworth was still with us, he'd be so ashamed of who we've turned into. In fact, spoiler alert, when we get to London 1802, we're going to see that he was already ashamed of us. All right? Lots of nature imagery in here, very important. But skip down a little bit to around line 8 and 9. He says, for everything we are out of tune, it moves us not. So in other words, we're just not in tune with nature anymore. And so therefore, being out in nature doesn't move us. Think about how often we, go about our day and go through, we're walking around outside, and instead of noticing the beauty that surrounds us, we're complaining about it being too hot or too cold. We don't enjoy that time out there. I tell you what, that's one benefit that's happened right now for me is that, being stuck at home as much as I have been, I like to go outside and do some yard work because the weather's actually been pleasant. And that's been how I keep my sanity right now, is being out there in nature. There's a reason why when you're mad, you go outside and you take a walk. There's just something about nature that speaks to us. And Wordsworth was really big on that. So he points out in the last few lines, and remember, we look for a volta or a turning point in the poem, usually about line 9, and you kind of have it here where he has this dash. There's a start punctuation thing that draws your eyes to it, where he says, "Great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn." In other words, he's saying, I would rather be one of these ancient people who worship the sun or the moon or the waves. He says, I would rather do that than be who I am today, which, he's living in England at this time period, a very Christian nation, although it's arguable if Wordsworth really had much faith. He definitely has a lot of nature worship in his writing, okay? He says he would rather do that. And then he mentions ancient gods, Proteus, Triton. So he's referencing these ancient pagan belief systems and saying, I'd rather be like them because at least they have this connection to nature that we've lost. And it's hurting who we are, in his opinion. And you know what? To a point, I agree. When we get down to our questions, we're going to talk about the importance of nature to you and in your world. So be ready to write about that. Some of you are going to have a lot to say. Some of you are this is going to be something you struggle with. But that's kind of the lesson, is how little this matters to us today. Okay? All right. Right next to this video will be the next one I'm going to do for London 1802, which is also a really fun poem to talk about. So I will see you right away, hopefully, right after this.